appears to be." "Appears to be!" repeated Palmer. "There's no appearing in the case, I take it. This Bradley's an undoubted offshoot of the old squire. His mother was a servant maid at the Hall, I rather think. You, sir," continued he, addressing Coates, "perhaps can inform us of the real facts of the case." "She was something better than a servant," replied the attorney, with a slight cough and a knowing wink. "I remember her quite well, though I was but a boy then. A lovely creature, and so taking. I don't wonder that Sir Piers was smitten with her. He was mad after the women in those days, and pretty Sue Bradley above all others. She lived with him quite like his lady." "So I've heard," returned Jack. "And she remained with him till her death? Let me see. Wasn't there something rather odd in the way in which she died, rather suddenish and unexpected? A noise made about it at the time, eh?" "Not that I ever heard," replied Coates, shaking his head, and appearing to be afflicted with an instantaneous ignorance, while Titus affected not to hear the remark, but occupied himself with his wine glass. Small snored audibly. "I was too young then to pay any attention to idle rumours," continued Coates. "It is a long time ago. May I ask the reason of your inquiry?" "Nothing further than simple curiosity," replied Jack, enjoying the consternation of his companions. "It is, as you say, a long while since; but it's singular how that sort of thing is remembered. One would think people had something else to do than talk of one's private affairs for ever. For my part, I despise such tattle; but there are persons in the neighborhood who still say it was an awkward business. Amongst others, I've heard that this very Luke Bradley talks in pretty plain terms about it." "Does he, indeed?" said Coates. "So much the worse for him. Let me once lay hands upon him, and I'll put a gag in his mouth that shall spoil his talking in the future." "That's precisely the point I desire to arrive at," replied Jack; "and I advise you by all means to accomplish that, for the sake of the family. Nobody likes his friends to be talked about. So I'd settle the matter amicably, were I you. Just let the fellow go his way. He won't return here again in a hurry, I'll be bound. As to clapping him in quod, he might prattle, turn stag." "Turn stag!" replied Coates. "What the deuce is that? In my opinion, he has turned stag already. At all events, he'll pay dear for his night's sport, you may depend on it. What signifies it what he says? Let me lay hands upon him, that's all." "Well, well," said Jack, "no offence. I only meant to offer a suggestion. I thought the family, young Sir Ranulph, I mean, mightn't like the story to be revived. As to Lady Rookwood, she don't, I suppose, care much about idle reports. Indeed, if I've been rightly informed, she bears this youngster no particular goodwill to begin with, and has tried hard to get him out of the country. But, as you say, what does it signify what he says? He can only talk. Sir Piers is dead and gone." "Humph!" muttered Coates, peevishly. "But it does seem a little hard that a lad should swing for killing a bit of venison in his own father's park." "Which he'd a natural right to do," cried Titus. "He had no natural right to bruise, violently assault, and endanger the life of his father's, or anybody else's gamekeeper," retorted Coates. "I tell you, sir, he's committed a capital offence, and if he's taken—" "No chance of that, I hope," interrupted Jack. "That's a wish I can't help wishing myself," said Titus. "On my conscience, these poachers are fine boys when all's said and done." "The finest of all boys," exclaimed Jack, with kindred enthusiasm, "are those birds of the night and minions of the moon, whom we call most unjustly poachers. They are, after all, only professional sportsmen making a business of what we make a pleasure, a nightly pursuit of what is to us a daily relaxation. There's the main distinction. As to the rest, it's all in idea. They merely thin an overstocked park, as you would reduce a plethoric patient, doctor, or as you would work a moneyed client, if you got him into chancery, Mr. Attorney. And then, how much more scientifically and systematically they set to work than we amateurs do. How noiselessly they bag a hare, smoke a pheasant, or knock a buck down with an air gun. How independent they are of any license, except that of a good eye and a swift pair of legs. How unnecessary it is for them to ask permission, or shoot over Mr. So-and-so's grounds, or my lord that preserves. They are free of every cover, and indifferent to any alteration in the game laws. I've some thoughts, when everything else fails, of taking to poaching myself. In my opinion, A poacher's a highly respectable character. What say you, Mr. Coates?" turning very gravely to that gentleman. "Such a question, sir," replied Coates, bridling up, "scarcely deserves a serious answer. I make no doubt you will next maintain that a highwayman is a gentleman." "Most undoubtedly," replied Palmer, in the same grave tone, which might have passed for banter, had Jack ever bantered. "I'll maintain and prove it. I don't see how he can be otherwise. It is as necessary for a man to be a gentleman, before he can turn highwayman, as it is for a doctor to have his diploma, or an attorney his certificate. Some of the finest gentlemen of their day, as Captain Lovelace, Hind, Hannum, and Dudley, were eminent on the road, and they set the fashion. Ever since their day a real highwayman would consider himself disgraced if he did not conduct himself in every way like a gentleman. Of course, there are pretenders in this line, as in everything else, but these are only exceptions, and prove the rule. What are the distinguishing characteristics of a fine gentleman? Perfect knowledge of the world, perfect independence of character, notoriety, command of cash, and inordinate success with the women. You grant all these premises? First, then, it is part of a highwayman's business to be thoroughly acquainted with the world. He is the easiest and pleasantest fellow going. There is Tom King, for example. He is the handsomest man about town, and the best bred fellow on the road. Then whose inclinations are so uncontrolled as the highwayman's, so long as the mopuses last? Who produces so great an effect by so few words? "Stand and deliver" is sure to attest attention. Every one is captivated by an address so taking. As to money, he wins a purse of 100 guineas as easily as you would the same sum from the faro table. And wherein lies the difference? Only in the name of the game. Why so little need of a banker as he? All he has to apprehend is a check. All he has to draw is a trigger. As to the women, they dote upon him. Not even your redcoat is so successful. Look at a highwayman mounted on his flying steed, with his pistols in his holsters, and his mask upon his face. What can be a more gallant sight? The clatter of his horse's heels is like music to his ear. He is in full quest. He shouts to the fugitive horseman to say, "The other flies all the faster." What chase can be half so exciting as that? Suppose he overtakes his prey, which 10 to 1 he will, how readily his summons to deliver is obeyed. How satisfactory is the appropriation of a lusty purse or corpulent pocket book. Getting the brush is nothing to it. How tranquilly he departs, takes off his hat to his accommodating acquaintance, wishing him a pleasant journey, and disappears across the heath. England, sir, has reason to be proud of her highwaymen. They are peculiar to her clime, and are as much before the brigand of Italy, the contrabandist of Spain, or the cutpurse of France, as her sailors are before all the rest of the world. The day will never come, I hope, when we shall degenerate into the footpad, and lose our knight errantry. Even the French borrow from us. They have only one highwayman of eminence, and he learnt and practised his art in England. "And who was he, may I ask?" asked Coates. "Claude Duval," replied Jack; "and though a Frenchman, he was a deuced fine fellow in his day, quite a tip-top macaroni. He could skip and twirl like a figurant, warble like an opera singer, and play the flageolet better than any man of his day. He always carried a lute in his pocket, along with his snappers. And then his dress, it was quite beautiful to see how smartly he was rigged out, all velvet and lace. And even with his vizard on his face, the ladies used to cry out to see him. Then he took a purse with the air and grace of a receiver general. All the women adored him, and that, bless their pretty faces, was the best proof of his gentility. I wish he'd not been a Mounseer. The women never mistake. They can always discover the true gentleman, and they were all, of every degree, from the countess to the kitchen maid, over head and ears in love with him." "But he was taken, I suppose?" "Ay," responded Jack. "The women were his undoing, as they've been many a brave fellow's before, and will be again." Touched by which reflection, Jack became for once in his life sentimental, and sighed, "Poor Duval! He was seized at the hole in the wall in Chandos Street by the bailiff of Westminster when dead drunk, his liquor having been drugged by his dells. and was shortly afterwards hanged at Tyburn.